So what I've got in front of us here today are two very similar Chromebooks, both very new models. The white one here is the Acer R11, but this isn't the R11 of 2016, this is the 2017 model. So this one here comes with a 32 gig SSD, and it also has 4 gigabytes of RAM, and it's got a N3060 processor as opposed to the older models which have the N3050. So it's a slightly faster machine than the original R11. So this one I bought directly from Acer UK, and it's shipped from Poland, and it comes in ex-VAT at around about £200. Sitting next to it is a very similar device, in fact an incredibly similar device in many ways. This is the Viglen 360, and the thing that both of these Chromebooks share in common, or one of the things that they share in common, is the ability to flip around like this and turn into tablet mode. And the same thing you can do, of course, with the R11, and you flip it around, and they're both touchscreen devices. So the other thing that they share in common is exactly the same internal hardware. So if you look at the screen of the R11 here, we've got a Celeron N3060, we've got 4 gig of RAM, and the thing that you've got on both of these ones, if I go into files, here we go, that's files, and what you can do is view the internal storage here. You can also view the internal storage of a Chromebook if you go into settings, and it will show 19.5 gigabytes available here. So regular Chromebooks only have 16 gigabyte SSDs. This one's got a 32 gig SSD, and the benefit, particularly for the R11, of that is the fact that this R11 has got the Play Store on it. Now this is Google Play Store for work, and you can look at some of my other videos if you want to look at managed Android apps on Chrome OS. So Android apps work really very nicely on this device. On the Viglen, which has gone to sleep, this device doesn't yet have Android apps, and if you actually look at it on the list of devices that are getting Android apps, this device isn't even mentioned. So I can only presume that it will be getting Android apps sometime in the future, but I couldn't say when that might be. So in terms of performance, they're very similar, and we'll run a benchmark in a second. The big difference comes in terms of the aesthetics. So we just have a closer look at the Viglen. This is obviously black. You can get a black one of the R11 as well, and that's the one that we deployed one-to-one. Down the side, on the Viglen, we've got 3 USB 3 ports, which is more than you'd typically get on a Chromebook, but you kind of have to ask the question, why would you use that many USB 3 ports on a Chromebook? I'm not sure why I would. Power buttons on the side, which is shares with the R11. The other side, we've got power light, we've got charging point, HDMI, and I think that's a micro SD card slot, and we've got microphone. The other unique feature, as far as I know, in Chromebooks is the fact that this one has got a removable battery. So we've got a couple of screws here, and you can take the battery out. And I'm in two minds about whether that's a good thing or not. It adds to the weight of the device. This is significantly heavier than the R11. It's also thicker. We'll put them together in a second. But these screws could be undone by a student. The battery could be taken out. And we've never had a situation where a Chromebook's battery has had to be replaced because it's just too old to carry on. They generally don't last that long, or we've not got to that point yet. So I'm not 100% convinced this is a particularly good idea. If we look at the R11, just close it up for a second, this is exactly the same as the older model of R11 in terms of its connectivity. We've got the power switch, we've got a headphone jack, we've got a USB 2 port, Kensington lock, and on the other side we've just got one USB 3 port here, HDMI, we've got full size SD card slot, and there's the power slot. So very similar devices in many ways, but aesthetically they look quite different. Then we sort of put them up sideways and see that the Viglen is slightly thicker and slightly tall. If I put them side by side, you can see that the Viglen is a little bit thicker. And what we found is that the cases that we bought for R11s for students, the sleeves, the Viglen barely fits into them, whereas the R11 fits in quite nicely. The other thing you'd notice when you pick these two devices up, this is perceptibly heavy compared to the R11, which isn't the lightest of devices, but the Viglen 360 is a bit heavy. However, the Viglen 360 is ruggedized. You're meant to be able to drop it. This is a sample I've been given, so I'm not literally going to drop it on the floor, but it does feel pretty tough, and it feels like it could stand a bit of punishment. And as such, I think it might make a really good trolley device. I don't think it's probably as good a one-to-one device as the R11, which is lighter, thinner, and altogether a bit more aesthetically pleasing. And the R11 does have a metal top to it, so it is pretty tough and very rigid. The only other observation I'd make in a comparison between the two of them is that when you open them up, one of the things I've been impressed with on the R11 is the rigidity of this bracket mechanism they've got. So when you actually touch the screen, it hardly moves. Whereas if you come across to the 360, it sort of boings backwards and forwards at the lightest of touch. It just feels like the hinge isn't as rigid as perhaps it should be. So what we're going to do is fire up a guest session in both of these, and neither of these are enrolled. This one I've actually bought for a relative, and this one, as I say, is a demo device. So we're going to browse as a guest. Both of these are on Chrome OS 55, and what we're going to do is have a little Octane Benchmark, and we'll do a little race. Now you should do this in guest mode if you want to compare devices, because things like extensions, the fact that I had Android apps running on this one, will make a difference to these things. So here we've got the benchmark. Now these two devices have near enough exactly the same internals, so you'd expect almost the same score. But let's just see what happens. They're both touch screen, so we can run them. When you look at the two with the same thing on the screen, there's a very slight difference in the sort of colour depth. The R11 has a slightly sort of richer colour, but the screens are both IPSs, they're both very similar, so you'd be hard pressed to tell the difference between the quality of the screens. The keyboards on both devices are almost identical. In fact, if you look at the keys and the text on the keys and the shape of the keys, you'd be forgiven for thinking that they were in fact exactly the same keyboard. There is virtually no difference between them. I think the trackpad on the R11 feels a little bit more solid. The one on the 360 has a few clicks and things and feels a little bit wobbly when you use it. So the R11 scored 8,309 and the 360 is 8,657. Now you really want to run these a couple of times to get a sort of mean. So they're not a million miles apart, but there is a difference. They've got exactly the same hardware. It's not quite a fair comparison because the R11 is running a version of Chrome OS that includes the Android apps, and so the software is not exactly the same, so that's not perhaps exactly the same. That might account for a slight difference. But the old version of the R11 tended to score in the mid to high 7,000s as opposed to clearly in the 8,000s. So it's a bit of a performance upgrade, but to use in terms of web browsing, they feel pretty much the same. So there you have it, the Viglen 360 and the R11. This one can be had for around about £200 plus VAT. It's £249.95 including VAT on the Acer UK website. So this is for the full 4GB model with the N3060 processor. The Viglen is very much aimed at education, and they sell this one for $226, I think it is, ex VAT, but that includes the management license. So the management license is typically sold for £19, or if you bulk purchase you might get it for less than that. So it's a little bit more expensive than the R11, but the Viglen comes with a 3-year warranty, whereas the Acer comes with a 1-year warranty. So in terms of sort of overall cost, they're incredibly similar, as the specs are incredibly similar. So take your pick: black ruggedized, or white and sleek, or black and sleek. Thank you for watching.